Welcome everybody. This is the SIG release meeting for February 24th, 2020. This is a recorded Kubernetes community meeting. We ask that everybody adhere to the Kubernetes Code of Conduct. The meeting's being recorded and it will be uploaded to YouTube after the fact. We have a Google Doc running with agenda items and we'll be taking meeting minutes also. It just got pasted by multiple of us into the Zoom chat. If you don't have it, it's also accessible from the master SIG list in the Kubernetes community repo. If you could please throw your name into the list of attendees, that would be awesome. And we could use, oh, I take that back. I was gonna say we could use a note taker, but Bob Killen has just volunteered in the Google Doc. All right, so we have a set of recurring topics where we get some updates from our various subprojects and then a little bit of review of where we are on our core things that we're working on, plus some open discussions. So let's dive into it. And first of all, actually, we do try to do a welcome to new members, and I feel like there's a few names maybe on the Zoom call today whose voices I haven't heard. So is there anybody who'd like to introduce themselves? It's also an excuse for me to have a few sips of coffee. All right, then I'm gonna call on people. Stephen Augustus, who is in the background of your video?
What?
Definitely a furball. All right, nobody wants to say hi. In that case, on to the next thing on the agenda, subproject
oh
updates.
wait, there's an Augustus here that wanted to say hi. You're on mute, by the way.
Can't hear you.
Yeah, Zoom I can't hear you.
Zoom app is showing your mic is muted.
Okay, now it's okay.
There you are, yep.
Hello, just first time here, want to try to contribute to open source, so trying to get used what's going on here.
Welcome. Happy to have you.
Thanks. I'm also happy to be here.
All right, then, subprojects. So first in the list is licensing. Stephen, anything happening there?
Hey, nothing right now. I'm thinking that we should, I don't know what to do with this yet, but we should talk about, I think that not many of the subproject owners for licensing have been active. So there are a few open things that potentially can be sharded out to a few contributors, but give me a chance to look through the open issues and see what we can do there.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. It's been an area where at various KubeCons, as we've talked about it, it's something where various people here and there, especially maybe in OSPO groups at companies, things like that, or depending on individuals' past experiences, there's people out there who have expertise in this. So if we have things we can write down and shard out, that's a good thing. Release engineering, there's definitely stuff going on in that space. What should we share with folks today?
Sure. So I think the first one, I think probably the most impactful one, is that we've been moving on a lot of the CREL work. So hat tip to Daniel and Sasha and Carlos and Hannes and everyone who's been diving in there to work on CREL. As of this release cycle, we started using CREL fast forward as opposed to branch fast forward. I see there was an open PR to actually remove branch fast forward. So yay, steps in the right direction. I know there have been massive updates to the changelog and release notes portion of CREL that are starting to be wired into the places where we call out to the old tools in Anago. So if Daniel and Sasha, you want to talk about that for a little bit?
Not hearing you.
Oh, you can't hear me?
I hear you now, yep.
Now I can hear you.
So I don't know if Sasha wants to go first on this, but was there anything specifically you want us to touch on, Stephen, or just like in general progress update?
I guess in general progress update, if someone has never seen the tool before, or if someone has used the tool before and things have changed.
Yeah, so I guess one of the big things is when we're like translating stuff, deciding whether to kind of like keep it in bash fashion where we're calling like command line utils and that sort of thing. And for most of the changes at the initial step, we've been kind of like going with that same pattern so that the setup and usage is similar to using the existing bash implementations. And then over time, we're trying to move like more towards actually calling, SDKs and that sort of thing. So a good example is any of like anything that's using Google Cloud. We have a lot of like kind of like GSUtil or something like that. So you'll still see those sprinkled in with some of the curl tools, but we're kind of incrementally removing some of that as well. So if you're familiar with that, that'd definitely be a good area to jump in because it is sort of like a one-to-one translation where you can see the functionality and just kind of like move it to using something that's a little more testable.
And sorry, go for it, Tim.
I've got a high-level question on the GCB manager work from the last week. Like, to me, it feels like sort of a wrapper, often or primarily in front of Anago. Krell is also sort of a wrapper, and I'm used to tools where you sort of have tool name followed by verb. And I'm imagining verbs here being things like mock stage, mock release, official stage, official release, release note, notify, test, release, notify, official, things like that. The GCB manager move
That's a weird one.
is sort of a monolith. Like it feels strange there. So I'm wondering, like, architecturally thinking, what are you all seeing there?
So I'll speak since I worked on the GCB manager one. That is kind of, I think for the bigger, scarier ones, I'm more focused on replicating functionality and teasing out the right things that we need to do. So like I started on the Anago one as well. And by started, that's very generous statement. It's essentially a skeleton right now. But really, I think it's naming is hard, figuring out what to call the thing. GCB manager does a few things right now that I'm not sure that we all take advantage of. The primary one is job submission, right? So I think its naming is hard. What do we call job submission? Is it just Krell submit or something, right, to GCB? I felt that using GCB manager would be very clear about what it's doing. It's doing the same functionality as GCB manager. If we decide to call that something different in the future, I think it's fairly easy to rename that stuff. So, yeah.
That brings up my second question that I was curious about. We've talked about the ability to do local dev test. Again, GCB manager sort of feels like an in-between. If conceptually, I think we build stuff in containers. It happens to be in cloud. I have a way to run containers locally. Like, could there be a fast iterative local dev test for especially for not unskilled, privileged, the people
yeah.
who don't have the magic keys to do things in GCB? Can they be involved in the process? And GCB, like, if we've bought into that as the way to do things, how would we abstract that to be also locally runnable? And then definitely the naming is less relevant.
Yeah, so this is something that I was thinking about while playing around with the GC builder or the image builder or whatever we call it in test infra. So we kind of did a bit of a fork of that so that we could take that functionality, strip it into a library, and then build the new GCB manager around that. So there's also the function of GCB manager, or not GCB manager, but the GCB build submit, where you can do like a local build submit So you can validate the options of the template that you're going to submit, as well as do a local run of it, right? And I was thinking that that would probably be later functionality that we could roll in. The reason that came up was essentially what we're doing in Prow is, if you look at the prototype build jobs, we're essentially using a GCP template to submit a GCP template to to run it in a different GCP account. So I'm thinking the local cloud build. Let me see if I can find that piece. Bart, I know that you had you're planning to work on something, and I kind of asked if you would come to SIG release and talk about what you were thinking of, because it was kind of unclear from what you had put up initially. So I want to see if we can maybe meet in the middle if there's already stuff you've been working on too.
Nothing yet. Not this meeting. We can talk later, I think.
Okay.
More research now.
Okay. So yeah. So my big worry is that people will start going down paths that are not necessarily what we're trying to achieve. So if you have ideas, maybe that'd be good to hear them in the meeting. If it's
So no, actually, the only idea is something similar to what Tim said about, just writing another abstraction layer over some wrapper, over some already existing tool, and moving the one technical dev to the another technical dev without any architectural or like design or thinking before, which is I think that which will move and will create another problems, not solve the problems. What the benefits of the tooling right now, which we are rewriting differently? What are the benefits of completely rewriting one tool from one language to another language?
So I think the benefit that we're getting right now is more hands involved in actually understanding what the tool does. The reason why we're trying to not re-architect them massively is because not everyone understands what they do, right? So having a one-to-one mapping of how these tools work is one of the first steps. I think it's pretty easy to refactor once we're in a language that is actually testable.
Disagree with that idea, because when you just switch a language without kind of conceptual thinking before, so doing even flowcharts or even, I don't know, kind of a document where you, before writing any code, you know what you want to do, it is just shifting, just digging a hole into another place.
Yeah, I think this presupposes that we have not done any architectural thinking about how the tools work.
Okay, but the question is, where are the documents with that kind of thing?
There's several documents out there that I can link you after the meeting.
But that's the case. There is multiple different pieces together, no one place with the proper documentation where we can, have one single source of truth about that, and then we are just patching, moving, shifting things from one place to another, and generating another technical debt, and this is not how the things should work. And I was working for a lot of projects where there was never any project or never any kind of product which that kind of approach worked. None of them, from my experience. Maybe I'm wrong, maybe there are kind of people who saw and experienced different things, but I feel like what we are doing right now is just shifting technical debt from one place to another place with one language, from one language to another language. So my approach and my thinking that this is the thing, how the things should be, is to first know how to solve the problem, then solve the problem with code. That's it. That's kind of.
So how do we solve the problem today? What is the problem that we have, or what is the problem that you're aware of as a non-release manager?
Exactly. That's the thing. What is the problem? What people think is the problem? Do we have any kind of place where we have the problems which we want to fix, or we just want to fix something because something broke yesterday?
So I see a couple of problems that we're maybe walking around. We definitely have a problem in the actual implementation of the bash. The style of the bash is complicated in a way that is not accessible or approachable. So changing that is a benefit. But we also have some pretty big picture concerns, I think, around how we release today. It's not very it it doesn't follow best practices, let's put it that way, of how industry delivers software. We have a set of automation run by one team that delivers things into tests, a different set of automation that delivers things in the sort of production path under SIG release, distinct from what the test infra folks do. So that itself means that we're not testing what we eventually release or releasing what we tested from an artifacts perspective. From a code perspective, these things get built mostly from the same places, although the way we do fast forwarding and patching slightly differently on different branches means that there's variation there. So we've had architectural discussions over the last year around shifting towards a different flow of release. I think it's reasonable to, especially as we have new people getting involved and changing code and implementing new things, to have them thinking about that big picture and making small changes towards that as it makes sense, as opposed to just doing things as a simple transliteration. And I do see some signs of that, but at times I agree that I'm not quite sure what's going on and the specifics of the implementation. So we got to keep the forest in mind and not just be focusing on the trees, but we need more discussion of what is the desired forest.
So I'm linking something in the chat that is a brainstorm. I think of all of the things that we said, the biggest thing to worry about, the biggest thing I get concerned with is the fact that we don't have enough people available to work on the tools because there is a lack of understanding. That's the primary focus for the transliteration of these tools right now. If you look at that RHEL-Eng brainstorm that I've linked in the chat, you can see some of the thoughts that we've built up over the last year and change.
I agree that's our main piece of documentation on the big picture, but I'd started that draft as a discussion point about what should we do, and we never really as a group talked about that. So especially the newcomers who are showing up, I'd like to hear more discussion about what we should do and why. This also goes to the earlier discussion. I hadn't said it out loud for the recording, but it was I put a link in the minutes when we're talking about CREL fast forward versus the branch FF tool. Like in addition to a PR to remove branch FF, one might even imagine a PR eventually to remove CREL FF, because there isn't a strong reason for having this fast forwarding. So we have a lot of things that we're doing for historical reasons that don't make the most of sense. And as we re-implement them, it can send the wrong message, I think, at times around what our intent is. We can brainstorm things, but we also need to sort of decide out of the possibilities of brainstorms, what is a sound engineering forward path?
So from my perspective, if we go iteratively to solve this problem, then first of all, we have to understand how it works. And for example, for fast forward is a pretty good example, because for me, it was the only way to actually understand how it works, and then use our libraries like the Git library and the repository abstraction above we implemented to implement that same fast forward behavior. I mean, there are just 100, 200 lines of code. This is no big waste of time. And then rethink the process and improve the process afterwards. Because if I do both in parallel, then it's highly likely that I break up something. So this is my general approach in solving problems like that, because the complexity is pretty high.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at if you look at recent times, if you take something like I guess the big Inago brouhaha of earlier in the year, that took Tim and I out of commission for a week, essentially, right? Poking at different things to try to fix Inago, right? And strictly because I think at this moment we're the ones who understand most of it. or maybe that's generous to say, but it, like we really don't have that option to take a week out of our time to do that all the time, right? So
But if we
writing,
had, if we had in some durable way, aside from the code implementation, some sense of what the original authors of that tool had intended, it would have made our lives a lot easier. Most of what we're doing looking at Inago is going, why would they do this? And based on how we believe release happens, we look at the code in ways that is full of assumptions, and generally those prove to be wrong. So I'm totally for incremental improvement. I think that's the main way that we're going to make forward progress. But I think to do incremental improvement well, so that you iteratively end up not going off the screen there, but iteratively end up this direction, we as a group have to have conceptual integrity. We have to understand where it is we intend to go incrementally, because at any moment you can go any direction, or you could just be spinning in circles as well. So I think it's important for us to have some of these big picture discussions more. We need to be having more of them. I think that's the main thing I was hearing Bart say, that's actionable. We should be talking about the concept endpoint direction a little bit more often, while recognizing that in the moment we're probably mostly just looking at point things, but knowing the end goal while you're working on a point increment is actually beneficial to ensuring that you increment in the most useful direction.
Hi, this is Dims. So I raised my hand. I don't know if somebody else was in line. Okay, I'll go.
Yeah, go for it. Go for it, Dims.
So for a while, one of our objectives that we said was to make sure that we are able to run, non-Googlers will be able to run everything. Have we reached to the point where we have achieved that goal? Like this was like the big goal that we had for a really long time.
Most, but not all. I think the gaps that we currently have are being able to push images to the staging kates.gcr.io, as well as kates.gcr.io, so those vanity domains that are behind Google, and being able to publish debs and RPMs, right? Everything in front of that process, I'm pretty sure we own at this point.
More specifically, signed debs and RPMs.
Right.
Right. Okay, so it seems like that's under control. So now we have moved on to figure out how we can break things apart into smaller chunks that multiple people can use or run or kick the tires. Is that where we are trying to go now?
I think maybe you heard more than what we said. That is, those remain the goal, but I think over the last year and a half, since we really identified those as the goal, being able to publish images, signing and building of RPMs and debs, we haven't changed anything on that. We are starting to have a vision for where that will go, and I think that's part of what bumps into things that Bart's working on in terms of the newer Kate's infra. But those aren't things that we have actually changed yet. We have a better understanding of how they happen today.
Yeah, I think for thinking about signing and what our approach is going to be there is going to be one of the next things. I've been working on kubepkg, which is the deb and RPM builder that we have, or that we will have, or that we will use. And the RPMs and debs have been removed from Kubernetes. So there is forward progress there. It's just, I think the next stage is figuring out what we want to do in terms of signing, as well as like having a package repository. Like these are things that people could potentially work on if they're interested.
Right. Why I'm asking these questions is like if these seem to be like higher priority things rather than changing the language where some piece of code is implemented, right? So,
I disagree there, but continue.
Okay, what do others think? That's a question, right? Bart seems to have, yeah, sorry, Bart, go ahead.
No, I'm definitely behind the idea of thinking first and higher level architectural design first, solving problem first, then coding it. That's my black and
Yeah, I think I want to make clear that there is architectural thinking going on while we're trying to solve these problems, and it's not a one-to-one mapping we're doing in rewrites. The primary thing that we're trying to get solved with that is maintainability, right? So the people who are patch release team members, like they cannot necessarily work on these things all the time. So you have to make it so that people can jump in and solve things in the code, right? And to do that, the bash is not very approachable, and that's probably why it hasn't been touched in like 3 years, right?
I guess that's something to add to the list of initial goals, was broadening the set of people involved. And there the thinking has definitely been that instead of monolithic tools, if we have smaller point tools that can be run locally and can have unit tests that are in CI, that makes it a whole lot more approachable. An individual can say, oh, this seems slightly broken, or there's a more optimal way to do this. I can tweak the code, and then they can see if it works. They don't have to make a PR to Kubernetes release repo and have it run on an official build or an alpha beta RC of the next official release in order to see if it works, that we have testability. So that is an important goal, and it is something that we are gaining on.
Right. I totally agree, Tim. 100% behind what you said there. So it's like, what are we trying to figure out here? What should be our priorities are, or do we already? I guess that's the problem here.
Well, help us understand the problem, because what I see is I'm trying to understand like what y'all want out of this meeting, maybe out of us, from the K-Tinfer side, because what I see is coming to us, and maybe it seems like the questioning of our architectural decisions. So I'm trying to better understand that, what we're trying to.
We're not questioning the architectural decisions. We are just trying to brainstorm here, trying to figure out how can the K-Tinfer infra help you achieve those other goals faster, right? Because if you're talking about signing and being able to test, pushing to repositories, nightly builds of debs and RPMs, and those kinds of things, those seems to have like maybe put on the back burner as compared to
maintainability. Yes.
Maintainability.
Absolutely.
So that's by design, by choice.
Yes.
And also I want to add that my kind of talk was that kind of the research which I was doing and I am doing right now was exactly for that purpose, to not just complain about some architectural design, but to actually try to understand them. And so far it is so, for me at least, it is so messy in so many places. It's changing so often that it is really, really hard for me, who knows a little bit of project from this time. So I don't even think about people who just are joining.
So I think, so I think it'd be super useful if you are working on something that involves our stuff. It would be helpful to know what you're working on so we can help direct you. Because yes, things are changing very rapidly right now. So I think it's helpful to have continue coming to the SIG release meetings and continue having these discussions so we can help steer you in the correct direction.
Yeah, Stephen, the problem here is doing something in K-Tinfer infra, it takes a really long time, right? So we have to not only think about like the short-term goals as well as the longer term. Like example, the image promoter has taken so long, and it's not we are not still at a point where everything is ready, right? So we have to I don't want to wait for the short-term benefits of the maintainability eclipse what the long-term stuff that we need to do and get there faster. So if we don't spend enough time thinking about the longer term stuff, then it's going to hurt us in the longer term. Basically, that was the thinking there.
So yeah, so again, I think it's better understanding. Like today I don't understand what the K8s infra roadmap is at all. I know that image promotion is high up there, but like if there are places that we're dovetailing, this is kind of why we suggested having the face-to-face at in Amsterdam to actually sit down and talk about some of this stuff.
That's what we are asking. What do you need from us going forward? Because if you say the goals are, we want to have a nightly Debian repository, for example, right? If that is one of your goals. Is that one of your goals? If that's not one of your,
that is one of our goals.
I know, but then if nobody is doing anything towards that goal, then me and Bart would just say, okay, forget it. When you guys come to us, then we'll do something about it, right? But I don't want to get to the point where we are unplugged. We want to kind of say, with the release team, we want to say, these are the resources that are needed by the release team. And this is the priority of the resources that are needed by the release team. So if we have that common understanding, then we can figure out how to slowly get there without questioning, okay, what is the overall release goals of, what is the overall goals of the SIG release or the overall goals of K8s infra? I don't want to get into that argument here. I just want to get to the point where, okay, these are the things that the SIG release would need in the next year or so. How do we get there? And what are the artifacts that we would like the community to be able to access from us, right? So I want to at least agree on that.
Yeah, I think that's fine. I think that's fine. Yeah.
So where do we agree on this? As in, how do we do this? Like, do we want to write it in a CAP or an issue, or say
we can totally write in a CAP
or an issue in K8s.io saying these are the 5 things that we need, and have a checklist there so we can go top to bottom in prioritized order.
Sure. Yeah, we can put together an issue. That's fine.
Perfect. So let's do that. So at least that will give us a signal saying, okay, you need these kinds of resources. So we have to go figure out how to make it available, and then how to write scripts to make it available, and then how to automate it. So you can request using YAML or the things that we have done so far.
Here's an issue in the chat that I could use some feedback on, and another issue that I've tagged K8s infra on that I haven't gotten a response from.
So the 964, there's a bunch of notes from Tim.
Yeah, no, that one I have gotten a response on. This one I have not. 911 is the most important one.
The 911 seems to be a checklist, which is under SIG release. So do you want to turn this into a K8s.io issue?
It's not a K8s.io issue. It's a release engineering thing. But I was asking for your input on the flow, if you think it's correct based on what's currently set up in K8s infra. So okay. I think, yeah, if I could get a response on that one, that'd be great.
Okay, can you please tag Bart and me on 911? Thank you. Bart, does this help?
What was the question?
Does this help, like coming up with a common prioritized set of artifacts to go for, shoot for?
I will also look at this issue. I remember I read this one. I will look at it again and try to get some feedback.
Great. I would say that the biggest thing for us is like, can we do the Kubernetes release on Kubernetes infrastructure? right? That should be the thing that we want to solve first.
Exactly. So please,
Yes.
let's march towards that.
That's exactly
rather than
what that issue is for. That's
okay.
why I was requesting feedback from it.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep. All right. So we're still in the recurring topics. Is there anything anyone else wants to talk about there before we move on? All right. Anyone want to, well, there is a release team meeting later today, so we can maybe skip the update for that unless there's something that people want to talk about that's pressing for the entire SIG.
Is there any key summary stuff that people should hear who are not on the core team, basically? What needs to bubble up and out? Anything that the SIG could do for the release team?
I don't think
It does
so this
seem,
time.
yeah, it seems fairly quiet is my read of things so far. But we're just getting into it. Maybe for the newer folks on the call, the release is cyclical. It's on a quarterly basis. And out of the 3 months of the quarter, the last month or plus a week or two, depending on what fires have simmered past the release as well, that's when things tend to get a little more exciting. Right now, it's kind of business as usual, things merging into KK. All right, then we have a number of things that I think are listed in open discussion which deserve some time. So I kind of want to leave off the project board review just for the moment. Also, that's semi-regularly covered in the release team meeting. Also, there's overlap across those. So I feel like it's not completely untriaged. So the open discussion, Jeremy Rickard had put a few topics around KEPs, but I don't actually see them on the attendees right now.
No, I don't believe he could make it today.
Does anybody have a sense of what was desired for discussion on those two
I
points?
think
We can go for it, Bob.
on the issues per stage, I think that was the whole KEP for alpha, beta, like people doing KEPs for specific phases. That is currently being addressed in the KEP of KEPs, the meta KEP changes. But pushing for just one KEP for the entire feature enhancement. It covers all the stages, alpha, beta, stable.
Yeah, so I think there's some confusion there, and maybe it isn't. I thought it was clearly documented, but yes, KEPs are for the entire life cycle of an enhancement. I think the confusion came from the huge pages KEP, where it was already GA and they wanted to make some adjustments to it. And we were trying to figure out, like, is this a new KEP? Is this part of the old KEP? Do we keep, and I think that should be a new KEP altogether, but we said old KEP when they were going through the process, so.
There's been a couple other KEPs too. There have been there's been some confusion. I think it was one of the kubeadm ones that was, they had a KEP for going to beta or something like that in and of itself. I don't remember off the top of my head.
Okay. But I feel like this will get solved with the meta KEP. Do you have a lazy link for that? I can look something up too.
I can dig it up.
Okay. Release team, anyone who's on the call from the release team, please take a moment to review that KEP because it affects your process. Definitely affects the enhancement stage. It affects some of the comm stage, potentially some of the issue triage stuff, but that bleeds into the issue triage KEP as well. So please prioritize taking a look at that KEP. And Bob just posted in the chat, it's poll 1545.
Anything else to say on those two? Any questions from those who haven't been speaking? All right, Jeremy, having seen Jeremy's mentions there in the open discussion, it reminded me that a variety of KEPs that touch on release things have been going by, and I went to pull them up in the enhancements repo and was reminded of a couple other things beyond the ones that were on my mind. So I thought it might make sense to see if there's any discussion that would be useful face-to-face as opposed to in the KEP, or if there are questions about what's going on any of these. So the two in particular that I had in mind are, well, actually, why don't we go time order? The oldest of the four is around adding conformance documentation as a part of the release documentation. This has been around for a year, and I wondered, since we have DIMS on the line also, oh no, not in the original discussion. So I guess, Stephen, you and Aaron were the main people talking about this maybe initially. Where is this left off? This being Kubernetes Enhancements Pull 717, proposal to add conformance document as part of release docs.
Yeah, so Aaron was primarily driving this, and I've just been poking on the issue to see if anyone is planning on working on it, and it doesn't look like it.
Tim, can you share your screen? Because I was not following exactly the number.
Wasn't some of that conformance stuff added in 1545 too?
Let's find out.
I've been speaking on mute. So in that KEP itself, the word conformance didn't show up, but it's a KEP that doesn't have much written in GitHub. So you have to follow over to the cross-reference stuff, and I'm not seeing conformance there either.
So that actually, there probably isn't much about conformance there. That KEP, this enhancement issue overlaps with 617, which is the meta KEP implementation. It's issue 617. Or issues. Wait, sorry. Yeah.
My fingers are typing faster than my brain is awake at this hour.
So yeah, we don't talk about conformance much in this proposal, but basically there was a chat on the SIG architecture mailing list about some potential improvements to KEPs, and it kind of overlaps heavily with some of the stuff that's already written in KEP 1A, which is now being converted to KEP 617 based on the new structure, where we'll be referring to KEPs by the issue number that's currently opened. So there are a few things going on there, moving the KEPs to directory structure. Take a look at it when you get a chance. It's if people have looked at it and they want to discuss it, we totally can, but it's meaty enough that maybe it's not in 14 minutes chat.
But I think that kind of leads away from like the basic question, like, yeah, Kubernetes project management, things are moving around how we do enhancements and KEPs, but should we be publishing conformance results for ourselves? That's what I take this enhancement 717 to be about.
I did find the little blip in 1545 that I was thinking of. There's a note in there for non-optional features moving to J, the graduation criteria must include conformance tests, but that's the thing that was throwing me off a little.
Okay, so graduation criteria of the enhancement itself, but not of not as an artifact of the release process.
Yes.
Okay.
I feel like from a artifact of the release process, this should be a fairly non-controversial KEP and a fairly implementable KEP, but I don't know why it would be so stuck for so long.
KEP's gonna KEP. Is anyone interested? Dims, is anyone interested on the architecture side in cleaning that one up, or do you want us to take it? Or it's listed as testing actually for the owning group. So,
well, we can ask John to see if there is any interest
okay.
doing anything right now, because the closest that we have on the architecture side is the conformance sub project, right? So
right.
We should ask them if they can make progress here. But I doubt it. We'll see.
Okay.
All right, well, I guess we can leave that one where it is then for the time. The next newer one is Luomir's proposal about moving KubeADM out of KK. This is a pretty major change. This is the first thing that is a release team released artifact that's moved out of KK, to my knowledge anyway. And that drives interlock with what we're doing in terms of our release process. This one was a little bit of a surprise. Like, we knew this was coming, but then when it showed up in January with the hope of going into this current quarter's release, relative to all the other things that we're doing, refactoring existing code, this is definitely an area where we need to re-architect flows, so it conflicts with the current short-term implementation swizzles. The last time I was really seeing the conversation active, this was having discussion around, okay, we'll defer it to the next release, or a better time, maybe in abstract. Like, we're relatively agile. Like, we want things in this release, and if not, well, it'll be the future when the future works. It's currently labeled as 119, but has anybody seen any additional discussion or changes on this?
I think that we probably all settled out to go do different things for
yeah, that's what it
119.
looks like. Yeah, it's kind of, for a month it's been quiet. So I wonder if it needs some comments to say, let's go ahead and merge this and execute towards it in the next cycle.
I'm not sure that we're happy yet. Maybe there were some questions on the release side. So maybe a re-review on our end before saying that.
Yeah, what I would look for here, following on exactly what Steven said, is what tools need to change on the release side and what those changes need to be to support this, right? Especially the tools that are run by the patch, all the release leads.
I'm here, by the way. I can explain quickly what's going on with the KEP. So I was planning to rewrite it in such a way that undergo changes are no longer required at all. And I have a different proposal. And I briefly discussed this with Dims and Jordan, but they pretty much said, hey, go to SIG release to discuss this. And my idea is pretty much to build KubeADM from KK, even if KubeADM is no longer present in KK, place it in a folder that is comfortable for Anago, and Anago can just release the artifact without having to build it. And also, I'm going to have to overhaul the whole idea around branch and tag synchronization, because I was experimenting with some tools on how to do this. So the KEP is out of date at this point.
Okay, so go for it, Tim.
Yeah, Lubomir, are you just trying, is this new thinking just to make it easier for the release team, or is it actually the thing that we would like to do for all the other things that needs to come out of KK also, right? I would rather spend the time thinking and making changes that will support extracting of other things other than KubeADM and not just a short-term thing just for KubeADM. Do you see what I'm saying here?
Sure, but the cap is called moving KubeADM out.
I understand, but from the release side of things, for this cap, right, I would like to think about how to support not just KubeADM, but others also.
Yeah,
I understand.
and I mean,
this is that is basically part of the thing that we were talking about in the beginning is like, what should our goals need to be, right? So, and this is exactly in that wheelhouse.
Yeah, so this is one of our initial criticisms of the cap, right? There was discussion around whether, okay, well, maybe we'll just do it ourselves, right? But like kubectl is probably going to be one of the next ones to push out of KK, and like it's a process that we're going to have to repeat for different tools, right? So it'd be nice to understand exactly how to do it, right? So the creating a folder and pushing artifacts somewhere and having them be available doesn't really solve the problem for us, because Anago makes some assumptions about what's going to be in the prepared tree, right? It looks to see if there are artifacts in the prepared tree, right? There are certain like we would, so that's like, for that we would have to add functionality to Anago to go look at this extra place, right? And like it more makes the it more makes the case for like this thing needs to go. It's not flexible, right? The sidestepping Anago and expecting things to be in a certain location, like that doesn't work today. Like we would have to write that, right? So it's still a SIG release.
But Anago today is calling make release.
Okay.
And if make release as a make rule builds KubeADM, then Anago is going to expect the artifact to be present in a certain location.
True, but it calls make release after a whole bunch of preparatory stuff around the branching and tagging. It's certainly possible, depending on what you figure out within your experimentation around branching and tagging, that you've done an equivalent thing, but then we'd at least need to make sure that we have a clean way of not doing those things for things that have taken care of it themselves. Because make release is easy, but this was sort of one of my questions in the cap, like, from what are you building? We have, that part needs to be reproducible.
I think I'm missing a point here.
You can set up your Git repo locally in your, like, you've just got a directory of sources. Like anybody can set this up, any automation can set this up. And at that point you can run make release, right? Like make release is easy at that point if all of its assumptions are satisfied. But there's other side effects that happen as a part of the build process around the branching and tagging.
Can you explain the side effects?
Not in 5 minutes, but
the basic thing though is to say, like, for the inputs of make release, to make sure that those are durable. If whatever your scheme is that gets the code into the subdirectory where it's make release a bull is something for a script that does a get checkout of a tag, it's probably going to be something relatively straightforward. There's a number of things in today's Anago that would need wrapped in conditionals to say if building regular versus if building KubeADM, but there's probably 2,000 lines of code that happen in Anago ahead of make release, and those are all pieces of code that are doing things.
So since we don't have too much time, can we say that we should, as a SIG release team, we should make sure that this is a high priority item for 119, and we should make sure that we can do whatever we can before 119 starts to help with this process?
So the support of being able to build debs and RPMs in kubepkg, as well as building something that is more maintainable with CREL, were our top priorities, and that's why they were top of mind for 118, because of this KubeADM work.
I can see those lining up if CREL has replaced Anago over this. I mean, at this point, over the coming 5 weeks, I think that's speculating. I would say that's aggressive and verging on unlikely. But if we presuming we have accomplished that, there should be individual point tools that would not need to be called when making kubeadm. And that could make it much easier to split out alternative workflows.
My question is, do you want me to update the cap with my current ideas?
I would say yeah. We should understand what you're thinking, and we can then comment on what surprises that brings you relative to our understanding of Anago.
Lubomir, I definitely want you to continue to do what you need to do, but then I want to make sure that Stephen and team spend some time figuring out what they would need from you as well. I don't think that's happened yet.
Yeah, I would really like to ask that, if you're having discussions about this, please try to have a decent chunk of them here. Like,
Stephen, to be fair, I think Lubomir is waiting on you all for this.
I mean, with the alternative approaches and stuff like that, like that's the first time we're hearing of an alternate approach for this, right? But it still involves us. So
yeah, just that's why he's bringing it to you here now, because he's thinking about it, so he brought it up. There's not been any discussion anywhere else.
I want to clarify that the alternative approach was already the cap.
Okay, all right. But Dims, this came up as a result of us reviewing caps, not Lubomir bringing it up. So that's why I'm saying, like, if there are alternative approaches, and it is, and I'm pretty sure something like that is listed in the cap. I'm just saying, bringing it here so we can discuss it. It's
we always have the option to stop releasing kubeadm with the Kubernetes release, which is going to solve a lot of our problems.
Lubomir, 100% correct. At some point we just have to do that, and I'm not sure that fiddling around.
In the short term, I think it creates more problems if it's going to be released exactly matching KK. Like, ultimately, I think as we split the monolith, things that split out should be running on their own cadence with their own release cycles. It would be great if each team that did that didn't have to reinvent all of their tools and understand the infrastructure and all of these different things, that there was an easy button for them to get their thing built on whatever it is their cadence is. But in the short term, I think just saying we'll build it ourselves means there's a lot of reinvention, reimplementation, parallelization of things, and risk that things that are intended to be kept in sync aren't in sync because it becomes implicit. There's not a lockstep coordination point there. As a project, I think we need to make sure that we coordinate the things that we intend. If everything must be tagged v1.18.0 at the same time, people who are doing that should be talking to each other instead of, I view it as a failing of us, collectively, all of us on the call, if we end up in a place where we're not talking to each other and coordinating that stuff.
So I just want to say that I already have a tool that is doing exactly that. It's using GitHub Actions. It is currently synchronized in a test repository. The other day, it created the release branch automatically after Carlos pushed the release branch. It picked that up, pushed new tags. So it's a synchronization process. The main issue here is releasing kubeadm as part of the turbos.
Right. So if you have a tool like that, can you link us, maybe give us a demo sometime? We're at time at this point, and this is a larger discussion. So definitely, would love to see that. That's something that could potentially be useful to everyone. Right?
Sure, of course.
All right, we're over time. Thank you all for joining. Really good conversation today, actually. As much as it may have felt contentious, we have to have these conversations. This is how we establish that conceptual integrity, being aware of what we're doing, and not end up again where we have something like Anago with all sorts of hidden assumptions that where we're trying to be in sync, we're explicitly in sync and documenting that all. So thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, bye, everyone.